Hi, friends. Welcome to this latest podcast of the Nationalist View, and we have with us a special guest, Dr. Sriparna Pathak. Dr. Pathak, thank you so much. For the viewers, we are recording it on Sunday, and she has taken out time from her busy schedule, especially on Sunday. So grateful to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pathak. And Dr. Pathak is a professor of China Studies and the founding director of the Center for Northeastern Asian Studies at the OP Jindal Global University in Sonipat, Haryana. She also serves in the capacity of the Associate Director of the Jindal India Institute. She teaches courses on foreign policy of China as well as theories of international relations. Dr. Pathak is a China expert. She is very well versed in Chinese language also, which is basically called Mandarin by layman. And she has studied in China. She has done research work in China, so she has got a lot of ground level experience also. So there are very few academicians who have got the ground level experience as well as that academic rigor in their approach. So we are very fortunate to have Dr. Pathak with us, especially in context of the fast developing situation after Pahalgam. So we'll have this conversation in two parts. The first part is basically that post Pahalgam, the terror attack which happened recently in Pahalgam in Kashmir. Uh, so what is the China's play, or how China is going to react in case of a potential nuclear conflict? And the second part, we'll talk about broadly uh, the situation within China, the challenges that China is facing in this Trump era, in this post-tariff scenario. So, Dr. Pathak, there's a lot of buzz about, there are two situations which can happen. One is there can be a potential military conflict between India and Pakistan. It could be limited. It could be an all-out conventional war also, because as they say, कि आप लड़ाई शुरू खुद करते हैं, फिर लड़ाई जंग ये तय करती है कि वो कहाँ तक जाएगी और कब खत्म होगी. Second is that there is already, the tension has escalated between India and Pakistan. Both of them have announced certain measures, and and when I look at the Pakistani media, so they seem to be banking a lot on China's support. So how do you see China's position in the current scenario and in case of a potential military conflict?
Okay. Thank you so much for the wonderful questions and thank you for having me here. It's always an honor, a pleasure to speak with you, and you're an inspiration yourself. I'll first come to this question about what could be the role of China in a potential India-Pakistan conflict. First and foremost, look, um, there's this whole China Pakistan economic corridor, right? Which is a flagship project of China's BRI. It's apparently deepened economic and military ties between China and Pakistan. There are investments in infrastructure like hydroelectric stations, fiber optic cabling, even in Kashmir. And this has raised concerns in India about the potential to front from China and Pakistan. Historically, China has provided Pakistan with significant support, including nuclear technology assistance in the 1980s, 1990s, which in fact helped Pakistan to become a nuclear power. And why did China do it? Just to counterbalance India. Now, the current epoch of history that we are living through, in that China will be very cautious about a direct military involvement in India-Pakistan conflicts. Why would it be very wary of this? Because China needs friends right now, right? China needs big markets. India is the biggest market right now. Why would it need India's markets right now? Because in simple terms, there's a tariff war which is going on between US and China, and China is clearly losing. That being said, China's approach will be prioritizing strategic opportunism, such as providing Pakistan with arms, diplomatic cover, or even logistical support, rather than engaging in an open conflict with India. For example, China could escalate tensions along the LSE to divert India's resources during an India Pakistan conflict, but it'll hesitate to be seen as overtly aggressive. It'll do things in such ways wherein you will not have an evidence trail. I'll give you an example. During the 1999 Kargil conflict, China did not provide material or political support to Pakistan, right? But if you go back a little bit more in history, if you go back to 1971, India Pakistan war, which led to the creation of Bangladesh, China provided significant but limited support to Pakistan. Why did it do so? It was driven by its strategic alignment with Pakistan, its rivalry with India. Um, what sorts of support did it give? Diplomatic support, because China is a member of the UNSC. It was a member even back then. It supported Pakistan's position. It condemned India's actions in what was then called East Pakistan and now is known as Bangladesh. Let's see how long that remains. And it even vetoed or delayed UN resolutions, which could have pressured Pakistan. Then it was military aid was, as well. China supplied Pakistan with arms, with military equipment during the war and even before the war. It gave tanks, aircraft, small arms, but there was no direct Chinese military intervention, such as deploying troops or engaging the Indian forces. Something on those lines could very well happen right now. One of the first steps which India has taken as a retaliation to Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, the most recent one, is to suspend the Indus Water Treaty. Now, even on the Indus Water Treaty, even though China per se hasn't really said anything. There's a lot of chatter in the Pakistani social media, as well as even on the Chinese social media. Pakistan or Pakistanis on the social media space are displaying this confidence that Brahmaputra will be halted because Brahmaputra comes as Yarlung Sangpo from China. Now, even back in 2016, officially this line had been taken by the PRC by the Chinese when there were these rumblings that India might suspend the Indus Water Treaty. This time, China officially hasn't said anything. But one needs to remember that the Chinese cyberspace is completely surveilled by the CPC, right? And on that, if there is so much of chatter which is gathering momentum, which is saying that China should, basically block the Yarlung Sangpo so that water crisis happens in the lower reaches of the Brahmaputra. If that is being said and that those posts are not being taken down, it means that the CPC is aware and it is allowing it to remain there, right? Now, unfortunately, the epoch of history that we are living in, therein, it's very easy to influence opinions or civil society perceptions through this sort of perception creation or even influencing opinions. That's happening in the Pakistani social media space, in the Chinese social media space. What has India also done? India has said that in the cyberspace, India is going to take down the posts coming from Pakistani social media influencers, or it's going to block content coming from Pakistan. Fair enough. India has understood that there is that challenge, right? Because these Pakistanis are using those sorts of threats that China is going to come to their rescue. But we haven't really blocked those sorts of things coming from China, and there's a lot of it coming, right? So, in all, just to round this up, China will very subtly support Pakistan. Officially, it will showcase to India that it is all for countering terrorism, etc. But then, very tacitly, it will keep propping the Pakistani army or the Pakistani state up. Behind Pakistan, there's the real boogeyman or the real boogie woman, which is the PRC, which is China. So, difficult times ahead. What should India do? India needs to be prepared not just to focus on the Pakistan front, but there's going to be another, maybe another front or any sort of subtle form of warfare or gray zone warfare, as we call it. That could really happen. So, I think it's going to be conflict in multiple domains, and India needs to be prepared for that.
Dr. Pathak, how do you assess the assess reaction of China post Pahalgam? We were discussing it just, I was discussing it with you before we had started, on camera conversation. So if you could elaborate a little bit, in terms of when you compare it with other major countries and other heads of the state, and is there, as you rightly mentioned, they are doing things very subtly and trying to even manipulate this tragic situation to their, advantage. So can you just give a little bit of assessment and elaborate upon it?
Sure, sure. The India got a lot of support or condolences or condemnations of Islamist terror from countries across the globe. JD Vance was in India when it happened, so but obviously he knew. So one of the first condolences came from the US. But it wasn't just US Vice President JD Vance who conveyed the condolences. It was also the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who conveyed the condolences, one of the first ones which came. And then, of course, there are lots of others. There's Russia, there's Italy, there's UAE, and so on. India did get the condolences and complete condemnation of this sort of a terror attack, right? Now, China first countries to issue this condolence. The condolence came only the next day at 10:37 a.m. on Twitter, or what is now known as X, from the current Chinese ambassador to India, Xu Feihong. Xi Jinping hasn't given any sort of condolence. It hasn't come from the head of the state. Now, one might say that, look, Xi Jinping is not really on Twitter, he's not on X. But the fact is, Xi Jinping has email. Everyone knows that. Xi Jinping has facts. Everyone knows that. Xi Jinping has global times, state controlled media at his disposal. Everyone knows that. When China needs to issue statements, official statements, they have their mechanisms. It does happen for other countries or even for Pakistan, for that matter, or whenever there's something which China is interested in. Why is it this time that Xi Jinping didn't offer condolence? That's one bit of it. Coming to Xu Feihong's tweet, in which he condemned all forms of terrorism. Now, look at this, look at the wordings that he's used, that terrorism in all formats should be condemned. What exactly is he hitting at? He's pushing China's own agenda even in this. Because when he says terrorism in all formats, he's hinting at what is known as the three evils in China: splitism, separatism, basically Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan, right? So when he's using the term terrorism in all formats should be condemned, he is actually being like a vulture, or China is being like a vulture, which is preying on this terrible tragedy and trying to milk it for their own advantage, right? So it should be very clear that this condolence, which has come from not the head of the state, not from Xi Jinping, but from this envoy, is also to push China's own agenda forward. It is not a true condolence. China actually feels nothing at all. In fact, it might just be really happy that there's a devastation which is happening in India. So one should not get placated by the sorts of gestures which come from China, and there's a lot of that coming right now in the last 3 to 4 years, in the last actually 6 months. Because US is actually trying to curtail China's malicious economic practices. So China needs friends. So it'll use all sorts of these tactics. One must not fall prey to that.
Dr. Pathak, I also wanted to ask, now we'll move on to the second part of the conversation. So, there's been, a lot of buzz in global media that China has actually basically been winning this tariff war. So I see, the investments which China has made in global media, they seem to be working out pretty well at the right time. So how China has been actually hit, and what is the extent of it which China has got from this tariff war? And do you think, it will be easier for it to, how easy or how much time it will take for it to recover, or can it actually recover? How it is panning out?
So, look, first of all, there's, by April 2025, the Trump administration imposed a cumulative tariff rate of 145% on most Chinese goods, including a 125% reciprocal tariff, which was stacked on top of a 20% tariff related to fentanyl trade concerns. And these tariffs cover approximately $440 billion dollars in Chinese exports to the US. What's the impact? So these tariffs are expected to reduce US imports from China by 800 billion US dollars, roughly 23% in 2025. Um, the high tariffs actually aim to cripple China's export driven economy, but there are certain exemptions on consumer electronics like smartphones and so on. The World Trade Organization has estimated an 80% drop in US China goods trade, which will lead to a zero point 0.2 loss percent in global merchandise. Now, the US is exploring additional tariffs on semiconductors, on pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, and Trump had announced an inquiry in April 2025. These actually built on a Biden era tariff: 100% on Chinese electronic vehicles, 50% on solar cells, and so on. Targeting semiconductors threatens China's tech sector. Though Beijing's advancements, such as DeepSeek's AI model, etc., they've been showing some sort of growing resilience. But when this is added with a restriction on critical minerals, that would also disrupt the stronghold or the chokehold which China has in this realm. These measures are aiming to curb China's technological and industrial dominance. There's also port fees on China-built vessels because in April the U.S. has imposed port fees on China-built vessels to limit China's dominance in shipbuilding. It's a part of a broader effort to counter Chinese industrial subsidies. So this sort of an increased cost for China shipping companies would disrupt its trade logistics, and so on. All in all, if even if I were not to get into too much of economics and data and statistics, look, the fact if China would not be responding in so many different sorts of gestures, it would mean that yes, it is not really worried because it can tide over it. Let me try and explain with another example, and that being from India. India also has been slapped with tariffs, although thankfully not as high as the ones which China has been slapped with. India is also worried, just like every other country in the world. India is also worried that yes, it will have some sort of an effect on the economic growth. But say India, or even Japan, or even Australia, or even Brazil, or even EU for that matter, they've not gone overboard, issuing these sorts of grand statements that China is going to fight back against the hegemony, or creating these weird sorts of videos on TikTok and posting them on social media across the globe, saying that China is the center of all economic production and so on. What does that indicate? If we just look at it in terms of human psychology, only when a person, in this case it's a country, is threatened so much, only then would it respond in this sort of a way to showcase that it's going to tide over all sorts of difficulties and challenges. It does see US as the biggest threat, which is why it's behaving in this sorts of way. Second part of it, all of a sudden, why do you think there's a softening in China's tone towards countries like India or Japan? India is still locked in a boundary conflict with China. And over the years from 2020 onwards, when India has been saying that, let's restore the pre 2020 position, China has just been ordering India that let's look at economics. Let's not get into political issues. But now you see a different stance. There's sugar saccharine sort of tone in China's overtures towards India. Why is that happening? Because it needs a bigger market. It needs all sorts of markets so that the losses that it's facing because of the US's correct stance on trade, it can somehow offset that by breaking into say countries like markets like India or other countries of Southeast Asia, Japan, so on. So, just to give you a gist of it, this is the sort of thing which is happening. China has also announced a lot of aggressive countermeasures, 125% tariffs, rare earth restrictions, and so on. So, this is going to be a new phenomenon of international relations. Countries need to be very careful that they don't fall prey to China's malicious trade practices. A, they themselves will get exploited. That has happened even in India or to India's economy. Second is, China is not the most powerful economy in the world. The US is, right? So if one wants to export to or have friendly economic ties with the most powerful country of the world, one needs to be careful of not relying on this economic bully called the PRC. So unfortunately, global politics is shaped by power dynamics between the world's two largest or two most powerful countries. Every other country needs to understand its own national interests and then move forward. So all in all, this is what I wanted to say to this first question.
One last question about this thing, then we'll wrap up the conversation. How do you see India's play in this? There are two views. One is that India probably will benefit between this US and due to this tariff war between US and China. And as you rightly mentioned, that the tariff slapped on India, so they are much lower. And India is also working out a bilateral trade pact with the USA, which is likely to come through. So there's a lot of talk. Ultimately, India can benefit because US can forge much closer ties to economic ties with India, and a lot of market which was captured earlier by the Chinese can be now accessed by India. So India will have that advantage. Also, a lot of manufacturing facilities again especially of European and US companies which are there in China. So because of these higher tariffs, they might move to to India. We have seen how iPhone manufacturing moved to India, and now it has become one of the biggest exports. In a very short span of time. So, what's your take on this thing? Are we, getting too optimistic, or rather, I would like you to, inject that dose of realism in this, hyper balloon of optimism that, oh, we are going to be a major beneficiary. So, if you could elaborate upon it.
Right, very, very interesting question. I'll first answer the second part of the question. See, any sort of change in any country can come in through only the positive outlook towards what lies in the future. I'll give you an example from the PRC. The PRC plans ahead and plans way ahead. It has plans for 50 to 100 years ahead. What is that really based on? Confidence. Its own people have confidence in whatever has happened. Yes, there are lots of human rights violations. Yeah, the Chinese public in general doesn't know what's really happening outside, and so on. But the basic, very basic thing is, given the fact that they are not a democracy, and that it's much more easy to manipulate young minds which are not exposed to alternative ideas. The fact is that not just today, but even from 1950 onwards, when the PRC was actually created, the people had a hope that their lives will be better because there's this particular set of governance structure, there is a particular party in power, and so on. Now, unfortunately, democracies don't really have that. So we are taught to question. We lose a lot of time in constantly questioning and doubting ourselves. Even if you bring it down to common human psychology, one can only prosper when she believes in herself, right? That being said, there should be also a dose of reality, and one must not really overestimate itself as China does it now, right? So it has to be a good balance between optimism and reality checks. Coming to the most important question, India actually stands to gain from the US China tariff wars because it can fill in gaps left by Chinese exports in the US and global markets, attracting supply chain diversification, leveraging cheaper Chinese inputs, and so on. The Federation of Indian Export Organizations, it estimates that there's going to be a 25 billion US dollar worth export opportunity for India, given that India has competitive strengths in cost efficiency, skilled labor, manufacturing capabilities. The key sectors and benefits, and I'm just going to list just four of them. First is electronics and electrical components. The US imports $150 billion worth in electronics, smartphones, TVs, batteries from China annually, which is now facing 145% tariffs. India could capture a $10 billion export opportunity by substituting Chinese products, right? Chinese electronic manufacturers are now facing surplus inventory, etc. India's electronics sector is actually growing with exports to the US at 6 billion US dollars in 2024. Then there's the production linked initiative scheme, which has attracted firms like Apple, which now produces 14% of global phones in India, and so on. Second segment, textiles and apparel. The US imports $40 billion worth in textiles and apparel from China, which is now less competitive due to tariffs. India is a major textile exporter. It could gain $2.5 billion in additional US exports. US buyers are diversifying away from China. Indian apparel exporters, the need has now increased. Going into pharmaceuticals, India is already known as the generic drugs platform of the world. India's pharmaceutical sector, it's a global leader already. It can fill in US demand for affordable drugs as Chinese APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, now face tariffs. India exported $12.2 billion dollars worth of pharmaceuticals to the US in 2024. And there's also an exemption from US reciprocal tariffs, 27% on Indian goods. So there's an opportunity here as well, right? There's automotive components because the US imports $20 billion in auto parts from China, which are now costlier. India could gain 1.5 billion US dollars worth in exports by leveraging its established auto component industry, and so on. And there are quite a few. What are the problems here? Like, what's the reality check that we need? We need to ensure that we don't really slow down. There have been opportunities in the past which we could not really grasp because there is a problem, well, of corruption, there's a problem of bureaucratic red tapeism, and so on. So the government needs to cut all of these out because this at the moment is a golden opportunity which I don't think India should let go at the moment. The world is looking at India, and India has all the potentials, and the growth has also been taking off in a good manner. If we could do away with these sorts of problems, we could ease doing business in India, further ease them, I think we can really grasp the opportunity. We need to have confidence in ourselves. We need to understand where are the roadblocks, and we need to clear them. So I'll not go into too much more details because this is like a very interesting topic. This is going to be very
I
important
think
for
we'll
India
keep
in the next few
we'll
years.
do a separate long conversation on this for our the benefit of our viewers. So yeah, please continue. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Yeah.
No, 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 no. So I was just wrapping it up, and yeah. So it's it's going to be it's going to be an interesting arena to watch out for in the next few years. And yeah, I'd love to chat more on this maybe on some other segment because I know there's a paucity of time today.
So thank you, Dr. Pathak, for bringing in this perspective. And to our viewers, if you have liked the video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon for the latest notifications. And we'll be back soon with another podcast, another issue looking at international relations. So thank you so much, Dr. Pathak, taking out time on a Sunday afternoon to
Now,
have
thank you
this
for
conversation with
having
me.
me. Always wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.